Good morning. So we're in a sermon series on the life of Joseph, and this is the story of Joseph and his family. Joseph was the son of Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and as we learned last week, that Jacob's family was less than perfect. There are no perfect families, no ideal families. And we learned last week how God is able to work in the midst of such an imperfect family. Today we'll be looking at Genesis 37, beginning at verse 17. Before I read Scripture, however, I want to make note of a loss in our church family. This morning, Joel Gist and his daughters, Jenny, Kim, and Deborah, at home worshiping with us online. They do that every week. They gather together around communion with their sweet mother, Joel's sweet wife, Joyce, around communion and worship together with us online each week. And last week, Joyce passed away. And so I just want to say to you at home now, we are worshiping with you, and we are all here praying for you, and we celebrate your mom's life, Joyce's life, and we love her, and we grieve with you. Her service will be held here in the sanctuary on July 13th. And I know you want to send them your cards, thoughts, and your prayers. Scripture. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance. Before he came near to him, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we can say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into the pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down for a sandwich. May God bless us today with the reading of this sacred and holy word. So have you ever been in a pit? If you live any length of time in your life, you know that life is filled with pits, many pits, some deeper, some darker than others. So if you're in a pit this morning, or if you see a pit in your future, or if you've been in a pit, then this is a really good story for you. Because boy, was Joseph in a pit. He was in a family pit because his brothers hated him. The Scripture says that they could never say a good word about him. They despised him. They didn't just dislike him. They didn't just tolerate him. They weren't just annoyed by him or frustrated by him. No, they hated him. And he made matters worse for himself because whenever he got the opportunity, he would run to his father and give a bad report on his brothers. And then he dared share with him his dreams. "Hey, guess what, guys? I had this dream last night, and I dreamed that we were all in the wheat harvest, and when we harvested the wheat, guess what? My wheat stood taller than yours. And then it circled around my wheat, and all your wheat bowed down to me." Not cool. How would you like it if your younger siblings told you, someday you'll be bowing down to you. Not cool. You wouldn't like it. Then he made matters worse when he said, yeah, I had another dream. And guess what? I dreamed that the stars and the moon, this dreamer said, and the sun, all of it will be bowing down before me. His dad was concerned about it, but his brothers hated him for it. And so that day when they saw him coming, he was out looking for his brothers. They'd been gone for several days, and Jacob sent him out in the wilderness to look for him. And when he sent him out in the wilderness, they could see him coming in the distance, and they said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him in the pit. Then we'll see what happens to his dreams. So they grabbed him and they stripped him of the beautiful robe that his father made for him, robbing him of his status. And then they threw him in the pit. Now get the imagery here. He was going to be above them, but now they were guaranteeing that their brother was in the pit and below him. Now imagine, he was only 17 years. He was just starting out his life. He was at the beginning of his life, had his whole future in front of him. And here in a very quick moment, a horrifying moment, it all came to a quick end. You're probably familiar with the boxer Mike Tyson. Are you familiar with his one great quote? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. You ever been punched in the face? I went to the dermatologist this week. I got punched in the face. You know what it's like to get punched in the face? You were told you don't work here anymore. You lost your job. You were lied about. You were slandered. You were betrayed. Someone close to you hurt you. When you didn't see it coming, she said, I don't love you anymore. When you didn't see it coming, you said, I'm leaving you. When you didn't see it coming, you suddenly found yourself in the midst of a whole bunch of family problems and family troubles. Or maybe you've had this experience. Have you ever had this experience? You go to see your doctor, and your doctor walks in and has a folder in his hands, and he looks nervous. And you don't know what he's going to say. And then he opens up the folder and the report, and he looks at you and says, well, it's not the news I was wanting to bring to you, but the test results reveal that it's a malignancy, and you're going to have to go see an oncologist. Wow. You ever been in that moment? You know what it's like? All of a sudden, time just kind of stands still, doesn't it? And then for the next few days where you're waiting for the results to come back from the test and what it is and what it looks like and what stage it is, it's just a whirlwind of emotions where you're moving from really dark, scary thoughts to hope and optimism. It's kind of like a tsunami of feelings. You're kind of trapped in the eye of the storm, and it's just a really frightening moment. And then it all begins in a real quick hurry. You know, your chemo and surgery and radiation, waiting between PET scans anxiously to hear if it's helping or it's a pit. It's an awful pit. You wouldn't wish it on anyone. Life is filled with so many different types of pits. You know, and if you live any length of time, you're going to move from one pit to another. It's just true. And it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how much you have, doesn't matter how wealthy or poor you are, or how well-educated you are, where you live, everybody ends up in a pit. So many types of pits. There's financial pits, career pits, health pits, failure pits. Sometimes the pits we live in are pits that we dug ourselves by choices that we made. Family pits, relational pits, addiction pits. If you've lived with someone with an addiction, it's a real dark pit that you find yourself in. The self-loathing, the fear, the worry, the anxiety, just feeling trapped. Everywhere you look, it's loss. And whether you're the family member caring for someone in the addiction, or the person that's in the midst of the addiction, nobody wants to be there. It's a dark, terrible, terrible pit. And then a spiritual pit, which may be the darkest pit of all. The spiritual pit of that moment when you find yourself in a moment wondering, God, where are you? It's just so dark. I can't even see any light. I don't know which way to go, where to turn. I don't know what to do. And I feel like you've left me, you've abandoned me. Just like Jesus cried out at one point, God, where have you gone? Have you forsaken me? That's a spiritual pit. I was trying to put myself in Joseph's place, trying to imagine what he was feeling. Can you think about it for a moment? His own brothers tossed him into the pit. Now that pit was a deep hole dug out of rock that would collect rainwater. And I don't think that they gently lowered him into the pit. They tossed him into the pit. And so that meant he was down at the bottom of that pit, battered, bruised, scraped, and bleeding. And imagine he's at the bottom of the pit listening to his brothers talk about what to do with him. Should we kill him? Should we just leave him here to die? Reuben pleading with him to not kill him. And of all things, can you believe it? In the story it says that as soon as they threw him in the pit and they're talking about killing him, they're eating a sandwich. I mean, they really talk about a pit. Now I realize this morning in talking about a pit that we're walking on sacred ground. This ground I'm walking on today is holy ground. And I'd like to ask you for your permission for a minute. Because I know that in this room, that there are several people today, many people today maybe, who feel like you're in the midst of a very dark place in a pit. Would you give me permission for a moment to step down into the pit with you? Right down into your pit with you. Because I want to say something to you. From a deep place inside of me, from someone who's been in the pit, and from a room of people who've been in a pit, let me speak to you. You are not alone. Hear me again. You are not alone. Look around you, you'll see people all around you who have been in a pit before. And one of the gifts of a pit is empathy. You may not know the names of the people that are seated around you. You may be here for the first time, but I want you to know that the people around you know what it feels like to be in the pit. And so we want you to know that we're cheering for you. We're here for you. And the one thing that all of us have learned in the darkness of that pit is this one true thing, that even when we could not feel it, even when we felt like we were all alone, we were not all alone. Because God is with us in the pit. In the darkness of the grief, in the darkness of the loss, in the darkness of not knowing where to turn, you are not alone. God is with you. And from a deep place inside of me, I just want to encourage you to do what you can, just to strain with all your effort and all your inner strength, and to grab what little faith and hope and trust you can have. And I have a tool for your pit. It's not a spade or a shovel or a rope, but it's a psalm. Here are two psalms for your pit. Psalm 34. In Psalm 34, he says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. This poor soul cried and was heard by the Lord and was saved from every trouble. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and the Lord saves those who have been crushed in spirit. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the desolated pit, pulled me up from the pit, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise on my lips to our God. Do not, O Lord, withhold your mercy from me. Let your steadfast love and your faithfulness keep me safe forever. Sometimes the best thing to do when you're in the pit, from a person who's been in the pit, from the people who've been in the pit, is just to say this prayer. Help. So let me say a few more things to you. I'm speaking to those who are in the pit, been in a pit, or going to be in a pit. Is one of the things I've learned, and we can all learn from Joseph and his story, are a few other things. One thing is when you find yourself in a pit, it's essential. This is so critical that when you're down in the pit, don't dig it any deeper. Now, you'd never do that, right? I would never do that. Kevin, you would never do it, wouldn't he, right? Kelly, would you dig a deeper pit? You have, I know. Me too. We've all done digger pits. Boy, I hate my brothers. I'll get even someday. It's all their fault. It's not my fault. God, why are you doing this to me? I'm just going to keep digging because I can do it on my own. I don't need anybody's help. I'm in this world all by myself. By God, I'm just going to keep digging a deeper pit. And we do it all the time. When we don't ask for help, when we just continue to make unhealthy choices and poor decisions. Another thing we learn, that you learn from digging deeper pits, and we learn from being in the pit, is this, is that, and it's true, what doesn't kill you will make you wiser. Well, let me say it again. Sometimes what doesn't kill you will make you wiser. Because sometimes we don't learn, right? And the thing is about being in a pit is it really is a choice about how you're going to look at it. Now I realize when you're in the middle of the darkness of the pit, you get the breath knocked out of you and it's just hard and you're not thinking about what are the lessons of being in the pit. You're just trying to breathe. It's a whirlwind of emotion and feelings. But at some point, you're able to look back at the experience and learn from it. And the thing you see from Joseph is that Joseph didn't keep repeating his mistakes. Joseph was humbled by this experience. And the other thing we learn from Joseph about being in the pit, we can learn from ourselves, is that sometimes when you get in the pit, you just got to keep moving forward. You just can't give up. You just got to get up, you got to rub some dirt on it and keep on moving and just keep on going because life isn't fair and it's about tenacity and perseverance and resilience. Anybody ever say rub some dirt on it, Barbara? This week I waited till it was 90 degrees because I thought it was a really good idea to run when it was 90 degrees. My wife said, "What's wrong with you?" A lot of things. And so I was out running, and I was running on the trail, and I don't know what happened. I was daydreaming, and I stepped in a hole and thought I broke my ankle, and I hit the ground and yelped, woo, like this. This guy came over and helped me, and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, it's fine. I'm just going to walk it off." And I walked for 2 miles. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's it. You know, when you get knocked down, you got to get up, you got to rub some dirt, you got to move on. And I was feeling pretty good about myself till I was talking to my friend Daniel, who's sitting back here yesterday at a wedding for his sister-in-law, Becky. And he goes, "Yeah, that's pretty good, Pastor David." He says, "You know, one time I jumped out of a helicopter with a parachute and I broke my back and I was in a bad place somewhere. I'm not supposed to tell you where it is, but I had to walk 15 miles with a broken back. That's rubbing some dirt on it. Thank you for your service." He's a Marine. But it's true. Sometimes you just got to get up and you got to move and you can't quit. you were not made to quit or give up. So hear from me, don't quit. But there's more to the story here. This is the beautiful part of the story. You see, there's more to the Joseph story than just what you do or I do or our attitudes or positive attitudes or negative attitudes or digging deeper pits or cheering for one another. There's this part of the story which is where God is in the story, because the story of Joseph really isn't about Joseph and his family. It's about this God who just doesn't give up on people. I mean, most of the people in the story, they're just not very likable, actually. But God just keeps loving them anyway. And the thing about when you read the story in Genesis, God just keeps finding a way in hidden ways to be at work in the world, and sometimes you can't see it. Later on in the story, Joseph is looking back on his life, and Joseph realized God's been with me this whole time. And in the story of Joseph, we're going to see as we move to the story how God uses unusual people and unusual circumstances to save Joseph. Jonah too, that's another story. But to save Joseph. You know what happens next? You know who saves him? Not Reuben. Slave traders, human traffickers, the Ishmaelites. Now, in the moment, it doesn't look like he's being saved, but what happens ends up saving him and his whole family because they take him to Egypt. And what looks like a bad thing later turns out to be a good thing, and God's at work. Do you know who the Ishmaelites are? They're the descendants of Ishmael, who was the son of Hagar, who was a maidservant to Sarah. Sarah and Abraham weren't able to have children, so Sarah says, hey, Abraham, why don't you sleep with my maidservant from Egypt and have a kid to help out God? He does. They have a kid, name him Ishmael. And guess what? Sarah then has a baby named Isaac, and then she doesn't like her so much anymore and says, you need to get rid of them. And Ishmael's competing for attention with Isaac. I don't like this. And Abraham, protesting, sends Ishmael and Hagar into the desert with a skin of water and a loaf of bread. A few days' journey in the desert, she runs out of water, runs out of bread, and sets her son Ishmael down in the distance because she can't watch him die. Ishmael cries, and God hears his cry and opens up a well of water for Hagar and Ishmael. And you know what Ishmael's name means? God hears. You know who Ishmael is? All people who claim Muslim faith consider themselves to be descendants of Ishmael. It's believed that Abraham in the Quran, that Ishmael and Abraham are the ones that founded Mecca, the Kaaba, the place where everyone turns to worship in the Muslim faith. Now get this. Can you see where I'm going with this? I'm not just pulling your leg. I'm trying to show you the connection. You see here, Joseph is down in the bottom of that pit and he's pleading for his life. Later in the text it says that his brothers were talking about, do you remember that moment when we threw our brother in the well, in the pit? Do you remember that moment? Do you remember how he was pleading and crying for his life, pleading for his life, thinking he was going to die? He's down in the bottom of that well crying, and guess who God sends? The people descended from Ishmael, whose name means God hears. God's going to find a way. We sometimes can't even see the way. God is at work in all things and everything, even when we can't see it. Even when we give up hope on the world, our God hasn't given up hope on us. Would you bow your heads for a moment, because I want to offer a blessing to you. For the pit you're in, for the pit you may be in, or the pit that you're standing on the edge of. Would just bow your heads. So today, as you live in this dark pit, or you stand on the edge of a pit, hold fast to the powerful truth that just as God was with Joseph in his darkest moments, he is with you and us in ours. You may feel abandoned, bruised, and hopeless, but remember that God's grace and love transcend our deepest fears and our darkest despair. Around you are those who have survived their pits and who now stand as beacons of hope and empathy for you. You are not alone. Whisper it to yourself right now. God is with me. God is with us. God hears your cries just as he heard Joseph's and Ishmael's, and God is working through the most unexpected channels to bring grace and love to you. Hold on to faith with unwavering determination. For it is in these moments of profound struggle that we are refined and prepared for greater purpose. Embrace the uncertainty that God will transform your pit into a place of blessing and growth, and let this hope fuel your perseverance. Lean into God's presence, trust in God's timing, and know that even in the depths of your pit, you are enveloped by unfailing love. And this is why we can walk forward with faith and hope, knowing that God is forever with you and with us, turning our trials into our testimonies, our trials into our triumph. Gracious God, in the midst of our deepest pits, we turn to you with hearts that are weary and souls that are burdened. We ask for your comforting presence to surround us, reminding us that we are never alone. Grant us the strength to endure our trials, the wisdom to seek your guidance, and the faith to trust in your divine plan, even when the way forward seems dark and uncertain. Pour out your peace upon us, calming our fears and renewing our hope. Help us to see glimpses of your grace in our struggles and to hold on to the truth that you are always working for our good. Lift us from the depths, Lord, and set our feet on the rock of your love. Amen.